And we are live. So, thoughts on Season 1, Transporter the series. And, let's see, I don't think there's really any introduction needed. But yes, 2 videos this week. I didn't really intend for that to happen, but, you know, schedules can't always be completely locked in place. Don't get used to it. I think there's one more of these coming up, but other than that, it is 1 video per week. That came off harsher than I intended to, sorry. And we dive right into Trojan Horsepower, and I guess I'm gonna read out the alternate titles, and I'm terrible at German, so this is Tod dem Vorschrift, I guess is how you say it, and Prototype. Those are the 3 titles, and let me just wires out of the way. Let's see, that should do it, and yeah. Usually I don't read out like summaries. I mean, you can look up the summaries yourself. I think I'm gonna stick to that. Now, just so it's said in this video as well, I've watched all 4 movies at least once. Let's see, movies 3 and 4 I've only watched once. I have not watched the 2nd season of this show yet. I have watched the entirety of the 1st season, and only that. Now, I watched this season in the order it aired in Canada and the UK, not in the US, France, or Germany, because according to Wikipedia, that's basically how it's supposed to go. And this is a show that really, you know, if you're watching this, I just realized I haven't done the, just to briefly, if you're watching this video and you haven't watched the show, and you're going to watch the show, try to watch it in the order. It's on Wikipedia. You know, it has the listing for how it goes for the different countries, and it specifically says the Canadian one is probably the one they meant, because there is like progression over the course of it. The thing with Juliet grows over the course of the season, and I think at least the German version of airing does not have the actual season opener as the 1st episode, which is just, that's when he meets Juliet. I don't even understand how you can, I mean, I don't know, she's not in every single episode. Maybe they don't have, it's very clearly, it's in a lot of ways like the 1st movie. Anyway, I forgot to do just briefly, this has spoilers for the franchise leading up to this point, so I'm probably not going to spoil the Transporter Refueled, but the first 3 movies and this season. Excuse me. And since the video is long, I'm going to put time codes, and I'm going to try not to restate anything in this. Oh, and I have done videos on the other parts of the series. Now, the set I have does not have any subtitles, so if I get stuff wrong, it's probably because I couldn't quite tell what they were saying. I am very used to subtitles, but thankfully it is in English, which, you know, I bought this off the German Amazon, which for some reason the American Amazon doesn't ship to my country. The British one used to, but they don't appear to anymore. The German one does. Just got to make sure that it has English language. I've found stuff on there that I had to say, okay, I'm not getting that because it's entirely in German. But there were no subtitles, much like the first 3 seasons of Married with Children, but the rest of those had, so. Getting off topic. Now, right, so this is where I get into the actual stuff from the episode. The opening very nicely emulates the opening of movies 1 and 2, and I like that we get to see him put on the suit, and he's still using the digital timer. I guess, should I say still, because maybe this is like set before the movies. I don't know. I'm gonna go with still, because this aired after the 3 movies. But yeah, he still uses the digital timer to make sure he's always on time. And this is also, you know, the opening of this establishes the character quite nicely. And he's driving away prisoners who escaped from prison. And, you know, like at the start of the first movie, one of them won't be able to stay in the car, although here he isn't shot. He gets out of the car, but, you know, he's standing there. He does have a gun, so I don't know if he's going to try to shoot his way out of the situation. But he's standing there. The guards are aware that people have escaped from the prison. So he's not in a good situation, even though he's not shot. And we're told we're in Marseille. Very nice precision driving on the scene. And Tarconi is in this episode. Quite appreciate that. A little good link to the series. See, that's also something. I mean, if this is set before the movies, I mean, you can tell that, you know, this aired an entire decade after the first movie came out. You know, Tarconi has aged, so, but then he seemed to quit at the end of movie 3. I don't know. And, you know, the escaped convicts get to not have to deal with the cops because of the funeral. Very convenient. You know, these guys escaped from prisons. You know, they had guns. Presumably, they're pretty badly wanted by the cops. And less than 18 and a half minutes in, and Frank has gotten his pecs out twice. This second time, he's not entirely shirtless, but he does have his pecs out. So. And less than 19 minutes in, first topless babe of the show. And I'm sorry, some of this might sound sexist. I'm going to try not to, but. And, you know, for instance, I don't do referrals. It doesn't work that way. How exactly does it work then? I mean, it's not like Frank appears to seek out potential clients. Wasn't it a referral in the first movie? I got your number from Hugo. Is this setting a new standard? Based on the second episode, I guess the idea is that Carla is the one who gets him the transport contract on this show, which does make a lot of sense. How else would he keep getting work if it always has to be, I got your number from someone else? And they're always just referring to him as the transporter. And, you know, I mean, they can't say his name. They can share details, but yeah. And they're already breaking the rules and making fun of it. I realize the lighting is not gonna be completely ideal here, but ultimately these days it is best for me to watch the skies, because sometimes it's very suddenly be like pouring rain, and it's been a little while, but sometimes very sudden thunder, and then I will have to unplug, and then we won't have as much time because it'll be running on battery, but you know, so hence why I don't unplug, just in case. I'm only gonna unplug if it looks really, really dark. Now, and Trina says, to Paris by 9 a.m. tomorrow. We have our first transport. You know, other than the prisoners. And we've set up the villain and the situation nicely. So Trina's father is French elderly Liam Neeson. And the bad guys want to steal or destroy the prototype during the transport. The system has a memory. It will adjust the fuel efficiency based on how fast you're driving. I love how sci-fi this is already. Now, having watched the entire season, you know, not every episode goes quite that far, but there are a couple of you know, I really appreciate it. I think this franchise is at its best when it just says, this is not, you know, in some ways this looks like the real world, but the laws of physics and just, you know, realistically the rules there are not the same as in our world. I think, you know, not every movie needs to be like that, but this franchise really excels when it just goes for that. And 3 of the bad guys' cars hit each other. Frank, everything all right? In a word, no. And, you know, Frank, like, grabs her phone, throws it out. And she's like, you threw out my phone. And he's like, if I had asked you to, would you have done it? I would have taken the battery out. I love his oh right face, just... And it's also, like, Frank Martin is not a man who's very commonly, like, outsmarted by other people, so to have it this early in the show, I quite appreciate that, because it is, that's just kind of boring if no one is ever going to be able to, yeah. Now, and the bad guy warns the father, who calls Trina, but her phone is not with her. And he states the rules, reaffirming them and telling them to new audience members. I appreciate that. You can watch this show never having watched any of the movies. That's, yeah, it's quite, it's, so far, maybe it'll change in the 2nd season, but so far it's contained, self-contained. You know, if you didn't watch the movies and you don't feel like watching the movies, you don't have to in order to keep up with this. You just want to make sure to watch it in order. See, if you watch the show in the German order and this is not the first, you're not going to know all the rules right away. Anyway, let's see. I liked you better when you didn't speak. I like Trina and Frank together. They've got really good chemistry. And about 20 minutes into the episode, we've had 3 precision driving scenes. Now having watched the entire season, you know, the notes for the specific episodes were taken during the episodes or very soon after. You know, not every episode keeps to that pace, but I think it would get kind of exhausting. You know, I've watched a number of action television series by now, and I don't think I've seen a single one where every single episode keeps to a really intense pace and has really big set pieces all the time. You know, I think that would just get to be too much. Not every single action scene is big in the movies either. And it tends to start relatively small. Oh, and I will probably be swearing in this video since they do in the show. That's also something I appreciate. You know, this show is more or less R-rated. I don't know what it's called for TV. Where the movies were all 3 of them were PG-13, which is, you know, there are a couple of fun, awkward little bits where they, you know, in the first one, Frank gets a flat and clearly his mouth says fuck, but they, you know, then they had to sell it in America and they were like, oh, okay, well, maybe he says flat instead, and, you know, that works. But yeah, you know, Trina calls him an asshole, then the motorcyclist does, then Trina again. And 23 minutes in, 3rd time Frank shows his torso, and Trina takes a bath for the male members of the audience's benefit. Not that that's the only thing on the show, that's for their benefit. And Trina and her father now do talk, and she insists on seeing it through. And they sex each other up. Frank is way more into it than in the movies, and again, I noted that for just this episode. Now having watched the season, yeah, he's just in the movies, you know, the women basically have to jump on him, but in the show, he, you know, it's often the woman initiating, but he's very welcome to it. And we have nudity in the morning after, and 28 minutes in we have our first hand-to-hand fight. It's great. I do think some of the sound editing is a little over the top. It takes me a little bit out of it, and just, yeah, it feels like, okay, that noise did not come from that punch. That was someone editing it in editing. And I like that for assistance he used like a pot pan, something like that, on one guy's head. And yeah, I should briefly say I really, really enjoyed this season. Is love too strong a word? I love most of the season. I'm not sure I love the entire season, but again, I've only watched it once, and you know, I've watched it over about 2 weeks, so I haven't had as much time to really let it land as other. Now, and bad guys approach the car, guns out, and Frank grabs the gun from one of them and shoots 3 of them, but I think it's non-lethally, and takes out the 4th one with martial arts. I like how he smashes the 4th guy's head through the window, which in other episodes at least he says those are bulletproof. Is it only the car or is it also the windows? Anyway, it would make sense for it to be also the windows. I think in some episodes it's also windows. And Trina like screams because her head is right behind, so it's coming right at her. We got more precision driving, and we've got that. I still don't know what it's called, but that big car that other cars go on top of, ramming several of them off the road when they're next to it. Frank's driving that one while Trina drives his car. Really great climax, very memorable. And the one bad guy in the blue jacket from here on out, just referred to as Blue Jacket, climbs on top of the big car, and the car breaks. The final bad guy car smashed like the front of it into the back of the big car. Can you see? Yeah. And Blue Jacket and Frank fight inside the cab of the car, and they drive through the sign that says "construction up ahead." Always a good concept for an action movie. And Frank gets on top of his car and starts sliding off the bridge. And then Blue Jacket wakes up and gets out of the car. And the main bad guy says, "I don't hurt people. That's what I pay others for." And she drops the phone into the water, and I do think those are really great. You get this. You can really tell how far of a drop it is. I mentioned that in the Fantastic Four, first movie, the 2005 movie as well, where it's a suitcase being dropped. Not a lot of good things to say about that movie, but that is always a good way to do that, because just seeing it can be a little harder to judge. But when you see an object falling, especially if it's like in real time or just a little slowed down, and the camera doesn't cut but just hangs over it and you see it drop, you get a good sense of. And the mechanic is approaching, humming his soundtrack, and he ran Blue Jacket over. That's the most badass thing Dieter ever does, isn't it? And she gets out of the sunroof. They almost fall into the water, and the car does fall into the water, and it's pretty obviously CG, at least at that point. But I have to admit, I was completely convinced right up to that point. That was the only time where the car really seemed like, they can't possibly have done that like the way it does look in the episode, as if they were, excuse me, back issues. There we go. There's gotta be like green screen or wires or something, but it looked really convincing. I was on the edge of my seat. I really felt like any second now the car is actually gonna fall and they're gonna go into the water. And final fight, Blue Jacket and Frank using martial arts. And Blue Jacket grabs and uses a shovel, and then Frank gets it. He doesn't really use it, just gets rid of it, and Frank throws Blue Jacket into the water. And they drive away in the mechanic's car. And, the here at the end, I get why. I think they outright say, Trojan horse, so that's why it's called that. And the also entitled prototype also makes sense. And the German is Death to Progress, which makes sense once you know what it's about. When I first tried to determine the viewing order, I tried to Google translate all these titles from German to English. There I could not figure out which this one was. And thankfully the series Wikipedia page clears it completely up. And yeah, I'm probably going to be looking to, the camera is there, but the laptop that is streaming is over there. So I'm probably going to be looking over there a bunch, since you know, last night when I recorded for The Predator, it, you know, suddenly the program just went, you know, and I had to start it back up, and I've lost at least a little time. I don't know yet how much. I haven't watched the video back yet, but so I'm gonna be setting high CPU usage. Now let's see. But yeah, the Wikipedia page clears it up. What the episodes are called in different languages, what order they're supposed to be aired in. You know, apparently according to Canada, and that one apparently makes the most sense. It says so on the Wikipedia page, and I have to agree. Seeing how Juliet, how the changes over the course of the season, it seems like it's the right order. And Frank drives around inside of the building. And then we see, I think, yeah, having now watched it, you know, again, I didn't catch her name the first time, but the topless girl earlier in the episode is the one now taking pictures of Frank. So, you know, setting up that there's something going on there. And, you know, it's one of the episode's hooks, which is always good for a pilot and a season opener and such. You know, you're like, I have to see what she's up to, what's going on with her, and you also get a sense of the show's action and, you know, the kind of stuff that will happen. I see why this is the first episode. It's a lot like the first movie, but clearly made and paced for TV, and I did not put any of the details here, but just to briefly go over, we start on Frank driving criminals away with precision driving who are wanted by the police. And you have you know, he's helping out a woman who, you know, there's something going on with her father, and the bad guy has some sort of relationship with her father. Although I suppose in the first movie the main bad guy is her father, but you know, for a while you only see Wall Street, and, you know, she says Wall Street has, you know, my father captured. And let's see, there's a sex scene between the two of them, which is not in every single episode. I saw the one review on IMDb that basically said, oh, every single episode has Frank having sex with a girl. That's really not that. I think at the end of this video I'm going to go over recurring elements in this season, but yeah, that's far from the case all of the episodes. Let's see, you have let's see, Frank has to drive her for a while, and the climax is driving on the road, and Frank is in a truck. There's a fight in the cab of the truck, and yeah, I think that's most of the. Now, let's see. Yeah, and noted after having watched another episode, given that this is a pilot and a season opener, it's bigger than other episodes, more money was spent on it, and since it's setting up the concept that they will later play around with more, the plot here is very straightforward. And now, having watched the entire season, it's not always that. Some of the other episodes do have fairly straightforward, like, yeah, Frank will get a transport mission and he will accomplish that transport mission without too much else happening. But there are ones, let's see, still gotta figure out exactly how to best set for this to work out now. But yeah, that covers the first episode. Moving on to Payback, Vergeltung, which I think might mean payback. I think this was one of the ones. Frères d'armes, something like that. Brothers in arms, I think. which doesn't really, Payback and Brothers in Arms. Both titles make sense for the episode, but neither of them are they're not synonyms. What's it called when it's a synonym for the entire sentence? Anyway. And I really love the guy mistaking Frank for a limo driver, and he's like, does he say taxi, and then Frank said, I'm not a taxi, and then it's limo driver, whatever, and the guy mistaking Frank for a limo, that has to happen every so often. It does look like, it's not like it says on the side of his car, I am not a limo driver, I'm a transporter, not a driver or something. So, yeah. And because there's 3.5 minutes before the package drop, he has time to mess with this guy. And he drives on the left 2 wheels of the car, maybe half a minute or so. So cool. And we again open the episode with cool driving, though this time it's for a fun reason. It's not necessary. It's not a job, and that's again. Ultimately, it's not every single episode that opens with driving, but there is precision. If I recall, there's precision driving in every single episode. But yeah, I appreciate that. At first, I thought that was going to be a thing because it's a thing in the first 3 movies. I think also the 4th. That's not a spoiler. But. Yeah, I appreciate that it's not every... There might be episodes that don't even have an action scene before the opening credits. It just has something else to get our attention. Now... 7 minutes in, gratuitous sex and nudity. I didn't note that for every single episode. I forget exactly when I stopped, but... Let's see. And we see in the flashback that back then, Frank was already a stickler for details, not changing the deal and such. I appreciate getting to see Frank in his military days, and again, that's the kind of thing where in a show, I have to admit, I think I kind of expected them to do it for more than a single episode, but yeah, in the movies, if they had started doing flashbacks, like straight up flashbacks instead of just a little bit of backstory and such, like I mean the third one has a little bit of a flashback, but I mean, like, this is a flashback to before he was a transporter. That's the kind of thing you can do in a show, and especially when you're past the first episode. And yeah, I think it's well worth it. Now, I have to say, this shootout is kind of bland. Nothing really happens. I think the idea was that it would be tense, maybe gradually build tension, but it definitely lasted too long considering that no one hit each other, I mean, ultimately, you and Jimmy keep expecting maybe Frank will be able to get to Jimmy and, rescue them, but then ultimately he doesn't. He drives away. And I get why the scene didn't just last a few seconds of just them getting shot at and Frank driving away. It had to... It's clear that Frank made a decision. He didn't just, like, reflect, act by reflex. And no one actually hit each other, and I think it lasted maybe 2 minutes. That's just too long for... If you're gonna do it like that, you have to film it in a more compelling way. Now, but it's the only shootout in the season that... Anyway. So, Jimmy blames Frank and thinks that Frank left him to die. And Jimmy shoots the guys that Frank was meeting with the sniper, but it was a trick. They played dead to get to Frank, and Frank's not gonna, like, jump down and check their pulse when when he thinks there's a sniper that he would be the next to get shot. And I like, Frank gets like a branch and hits the guy in the face with it, knocking him out. And a car chase through the woods on buggies. I do wish that there were more like this. Most of the car chases in this, it's on roads and streets, and he's often in his own car, which I like. I like seeing so much of that when, you know, in the movies there's not that much of that considering. But I do think it would be really nice to get more, you know, yeah. And he like runs one of the, he bumps into one of them, runs him off. That's really cool. And Frank left the money on the ground and hid, and the guy went straight for it. I thought that only worked in stealth games. But they got the money, and Jimmy wants to screw over Frank and score both the money and the case to get revenge for him. In both cases, you know, whether it was Frank apparently leaving Jimmy during the shootout or Jimmy leaving Frank with nothing, in both cases, one of them leaves the other to face consequences. And Frank now has to fight both Jimmy and his guys and the guys working for the Russian mob, who assume that Frank has both the money and the case. They trust Jimmy and his crew. And once he points out they still want the money, they go along. Now, around a half hour in, martial arts fight in the elevator and the car chase. Very cool. Frank easily defeats Jimmy with martial arts, and let's see, and then almost immediately there's a rematch where they're more evenly matched. And Frank points out he couldn't have saved Jimmy. Jimmy does claim that he would have come back even if they died together. And then the bad guys come in, they shoot everyone except for Jimmy, and Frank uses parkour to get back to the apartment since he can hear the shooting, and you know, it's much faster that way. Now, and Jimmy did get out of the apartment. Frank takes them down martial arts, even though they have guns. And the Russian mobster is arrested. And that covers that one. The General's Daughter. And in German, it's eine neue Mission, which I think means a new mission, which, again, that's not exactly a direct translation. And Protection Rapproché is the alternate title. Is the third title in French? I hadn't really noticed before now, but I guess Prototype might be the same in French and English. And Frank responding to Carl, you know, I think she says something like, "You're in a good mood," and he's like, "Things haven't started going wrong yet." And again, precision driving right from the start. I like briefly seeing the cat who doesn't care about the car. That was very French. That felt like something that could have been in one of the movies or other French movies. You know, what's it called? The one that's named after a dog. And it also felt like something that could have been in a, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, you know, Delicatessen, Alien Resurrection. It felt like it could have been in one of his movies. Rottweiler? It's not Rottweiler. Doberman, I think it's called, with the badass guy. You know, the cat bit could have easily been in one of those. And she criticizes that he drives a car, you know, this gas guzzling car, and then, you know, she gets shot at by another gas guzzler. And he crashes into her car, squishing it, and that was also, I think at least one shot of that was a little bit fakey CGI looking, but I think most of the CGI on the show is probably pretty good. I think there was more than, right before recording this, I watched, there's this 22 minutes behind the scenes on the first season, and they talk about how in a bunch of the precision driving, they can't have the actor doing that because it's too dangerous. So they drove a car with cameras all around it through those scenes, you know, obviously not when filming the car itself, and then they used the footage from that on green screens and then put in the actor. I have to say, it convinced me every single time. I mean, I wasn't seeing if I could tell if there was something there. I kind of assumed that they did have the actor doing those scenes, but yeah, I didn't notice that much CG in the season. Now, let's see. So, but yeah, you know, he squishes her car and then he blows it up with his own cigarette lighter, which works, meaning no one will be telling him to fix the cigarette lighter. And then he's like, sorry about the car. Maybe next time drive electric. I see your environmental concern and I raise it. And just, you know, because if her car had been electric rather than just, you know, a smaller, more like fuel efficient car, I think is the term, not a car person. Let's see, is a car person technically a transformer? Anyway, you know, if hers had been electric, you know, it probably wouldn't have been able to blow up like that. And Frank goes home and Tarconi comes by and they talk, and Tarconi accepts his excuses as usual. And the goons are very close to Frank and the client, both in the hotel and in the clothing store. And she gets naked in front of him and puts on clothes, puts on clothes that she's trying on, she asks him for feedback on it, which I'm not sure that happens very much in real life, but it does happen in like movies and TV shows because a lot of guys fantasize about that. Great fight with the mannequin dolls, and he gives Delia the USB key with all the details. And the general manages to talk Frank into driving her again, this time to Paris. I love Frank taking out the goons who have guns while he's using martial arts. Just once in one of these shows, when someone gives like this long, a numerical code, I want the other guy to say, can you repeat everything after that first number? Just, yeah. And Frank trusts her with the ignition key and takes cover behind the desk and runs and jumps, getting through the sunroof into his car that she was already driving. Is it me, or does the German crime log look kind of like Udo Kier? And Delia's mother has kind of a Jodie Foster thing going on. When she calls Delia, I got the sense that maybe the personal assistant is in on it, but then, right after she hangs up, it's confirmed. So it's not one of those where you're just sitting and waiting for the show to catch up to what you've already figured out. And still recording. And Delia realizes too late that the personal assistant is in on it, and put it in the car, and the personal assistant gets the USB key. 1 second. I think this helped before, so I'm going to try to see if it helps now to make it not use as much. Yeah, it's worth a shot. I'm trying to recreate the conditions from back when it did not suddenly, cut out the, let's see, stop recording, stop broadcasting. And let's see. And, they do have the USB key, but they don't kill Delia right away. They don't know if she told the stuff on the USB key to anyone. Why don't you take that thing and shove it up your ass? She sits under pressure. For those who don't know, Sydney Bristow is what I'm referring to. Not Sydney from Scream. Although she also sometimes... Maybe is it just a thing with girls called Sydney? And he chases down the plane like in the climax of the second movie. Really, really cool. An awesome martial arts fight between Frank and the bad guy. And then Frank stabs the guy with the musical thing. Live by the musical thing, die by the musical thing. That was, in case you haven't watched the episode or forgot, that was the thing that he was threatening Delia with earlier. And that was the thing she said to shove up her ass. Which I guess Frank heard and decided not going to go for the ass, but something else. But, foreshadowing, I guess. And they fake Delia's death with the plane crash so she can escape. Did I already? I think I already did this, but just to make absolutely certain, I did in fact. And we are back. Not with more people who look like things, but it cut out, but I realized it immediately. So I don't think that I lost any. Now, just gonna make sure to note, just in case it makes two different videos. Right, they fake Delia's death with the plane crash so that she can escape, since that one guy wasn't the only person who would be looking for her. Now, Delia could very easily have been as annoying and as annoying a character as Valentina in the third movie, who again I did like overall. I can imagine that they were careful to make sure she didn't annoy people as much. And that brings us to Harvest. Waterliebe Aker Uver, I guess is how I pronounce it. Yeah, I am really realizing now. The third title is definitely in French. Now, and we have precision driving while being fired upon. And the family whose son needs a heart transplant is introduced. Poor Dieter. Frank, would you stop messing with him? And the crime lord says, I'll do anything to prevent his son from dying soon. I like the intercutting of Frank and the heart surgery, and the heart is gone. And the doctor says the heart can remain viable for only 4 hours. Good ticking clock. I do think that, I mean, every time they mention how much time is left, they almost always say 3 hours or just under 3 hours. I do kind of wish that they maybe didn't say it as often or pushed it a little further along or something, but yeah. And Tarconi is in charge of the investigation, and the technician hates the press filming him, and then Tarconi said, you know, I told them you made a full confession, gave me the names of the people you work for. I didn't say anything like that. Clever trick, Tarconi. And he tells Frank the heart is for a sick kid. Frank takes a while to make up his mind, but he does then drive off. And let's see. Frank is making enemies. The guy referring people to Carla tells her. And we're back to the precision driving from the start. And the bad guys can't make the jump like he could because the ramp is broken. Frank confirms that his package is the heart. And he doesn't care that the client is a crime lord, but he does want to know why he needs the heart. And the crime lord puts everyone to work looking for Frank, which I quite like this bit of just, yeah, criminals around town, recognizing Frank. And yeah. And Frank steps onto the two guys in the mud. Dieter, she's not that kind of masseuse. She makes it hurt. And then, she throws the money at him. Here, go finish yourself. And Frank spots them and has to run. More parkour, more climbing up buildings. Knocks down stuff in the path to slow them down. And I wrote the cop, but I think it's Tarconi. Gets frustrated with Frank, and he does hand the heart to a cop, but another cop is on the take, grabs the heart for the bad guy. Again, I like that. I didn't quite expect that, but once it happens, right, of course, some of these cops are going to be on the take, and yeah. And Tarconi tells Frank that they haven't called it in, which and he's like, they would send that to, I would hear it immediately. So, and Frank makes it there before they do, and uses the defibrillator to knock the guy out. And a fight between the crime lord and Frank, and then Tarconi shot the crime lord, and the crime lord will give his own heart to save his son. Convenient writing that this is an option, but I do appreciate it. I mean, it would really be kind of unpleasant of an ending if, yeah, we saved the kid of the good guy, but I mean, the kid of the crime lord didn't do anything. He's a kid. I mean, that would be like, A hero punching an old lady on a bus. I really love that trailer. I cannot wait for that movie. And if you don't know what trailer I'm referring to, get out from underneath the rock and Google. Let's see. And Carla fires the sleazy guy. And Tarconi's like, I think those people should be more careful in the future. He accepts that Frank didn't know as long as he makes sure that he will know in the future. So, yeah. And we see the female cop again, who is still on Frank's trail. And still recording. That brings us to Dead Drop, also known as Plan B and À l'aveugle. Some people are going to watch this episode, this video, and their main takeaway is going to be how bad I am at pronouncing German and French. And we open the episode with an actual race. I quite like the flirty nature of it. And Frank spills coffee and is really bothered by it. And now Frank is in the US and knows the client's package. It's his old CIA instructor, Jack. And he's got daredevil powers. Is this an emergency? Yes, it's my sister's wedding. I quite like Dieter. Except for, I didn't quite like when he's like with girls and such, but on the whole, I quite like. And they're shot at from outside the cafe. And it just, you know, Jack, he's like, oh, let's go eat. You know, there's such a thing as takeout, right? Takeout, what's it called? Yeah, you know, you drive through or something. I mean, it's good enough for Batman and Batman Forever. Let's see. And Smith, keep your gun in your pants. I want him alive. Would you prefer to speak English? As someone who doesn't speak French and who's watching this without subtitles, I sure would. So Smith sends, you know, these CIA agents, but they're used to killing their targets, and you know, they're like, you know, I want him alive. Then why are you sending us? Frank really does not want Dieter to wear snakeskin, which does, you know, yeah. Your sister will kill you, and then she'll kill me if you show up wearing snakeskin. And they think that Frank is in the shower because of the fake out. Really great fight. And that's, again, I mean, a lot of the guys that he takes on is just, you know, regular guys, or not regular guys, but they're like, they're working for the mob or this or the like, and we don't know exactly how well they've been trained, but these are CIA assassins, and he takes them out. So yeah, that's really badass. You're authorized to use the force necessary. And the dead drop is gone. Now he really is doing the daredevil thing, although he is shown to also sometimes misread and get hit. And Frank helps Jack adjust where to shoot. And he puts the dead drop in the drive. And they're shot at from the car. Poor Dieter, he just wants to make the saleswoman happy. And Carla spills wine. Put down wherever you're doing, and it's the bra, because, yeah. And Jack describes how the other guys who retired have not done well. I don't want any more bodies. And he recognizes Smith by his shitty aftershave. I like the tension as the drive is passed and checked. And we find out that Smith is a bad guy. And the girl he raced at the start shows up with a car. Great. And, you know, she was also the one who tested to make sure that Frank was as good of a driver, you know, for Jack. A very cool fight in the kitchen. And now Frank has to fight blind because Smith threw like some powder in his eyes. And Smith creates a noise distraction, very smart. Again, I appreciate that they're not always just these faceless bad guys who never make smart decisions. And that's also, I mean, in the movies they kind of tended to be. I'm not sure I remember that many like really smart decisions made by. Oh, 1 second, let me. And yes. And Jack taught Smith how to fight, but he says Frank was always better than him. And there we go. Hot ice, which I appreciate that because, I mean, ice can mean diamonds, and hot can mean, you know, it's like very recently been stolen, so cops are looking for it. Excuse me. Yeah, hot ice. That's a clever. Blutdiamanten and Diamant de Sang, I guess. I will never tire of Frank driving on 2 wheels of a car instead of 4. And the asshole villain forces her sexually. It's a good, you know, I didn't think it was absolutely necessary, but it establishes that he really, you know, he is a bad guy. I like Darcy Daniels right from the start. I like the intercutting, the bad guy sneaking in, shooting, the hockey game, the security guards at the monitors. Great fight between Frank and Darcy, and she handcuffs him. Very Punisher Warzone, quite like it. I like the tension of them gradually breaking the glass to get into Darcy and Frank. And Lester's paying too much attention to the hockey game to listen to. And then he does pick it up, but he's shot in the back. And, you know, Darcy's talking about all the different, you know, all the different stuff they do have in the building. And she mentions dentist, and he's like, dentist, take me to the dentist. Of course, because Frank can use their tools. Now, let's see. And, you know, her needing to go to the bathroom and then insisting on washing her hands is kind of sexist. I guess it might be a reference to the first film and or to The Big Hit, which I remember as being fun, but it's been years since I watched it. Great fight in the dentist office, and she activated the fire alarm. But they do catch her, and the goon dressed as a guard gets the help of the authorities. Making lemons out of lemonade. Now that would be impressive. If life gives you lemonade and you can make lemons out of it, you know, I mean, if you can literally do that figuratively, I do know quite a few people who can take good news and turn it into bad news. And find a cloud for every silver lining. And, you know, Frank crawls out of the window using sheets tied together. And Frank drives off. The goons follow him. And Carter's like, break the rules every once in a while. And he's like, I break the rules at least once a week. I quite like the honesty. Much like the Prime Directive or whatever it's called, you know, in Star Trek. Good car chase. I get the feeling Frank would be less eager to smash his car into the back of theirs if he knew Darcy was in the trunk. And Frank finds a pool of blood and stuff that's been searched through. And Frank calls Ian O'Sullivan. Frank kicks the guy into a goal, and we hear the goal sound. Yeah, I think that's it. And Darcy, who stayed after Frank told her to run and leave you behind. You know how hard it is to find a good dentist? I quite like the confrontation between the African and Ian. And Frank kicks the guy down the stairs. The crowd goes wild. And of course, Darcy kisses him. And they actually fight on the ice, and the commentator enjoys it, having no idea how serious it is. He thinks it's like rowdy fans or something, you know, just, it's rough horseplay. It's not You know, some would call it rape, but Republicans would call it rough horseplay. Great reaction shots to the journalist's footage. He completely loses the crowd, and you know, yeah, and then he's like, no, it's not true, I'm not a sadist. And then his wife, you know, confirms he's a sadist. You know, that's the thing. People who can keep up appearances in public, you know, they can't hide it from the people really close to them. You know, a lot of people who live with, you know, doesn't have to be quite a sadist, you know, just a narcissist or an asshole of some kind, you know, they know because he behaves like an asshole around them. But, you know, when other people see him, he's able to keep up appearances. And his son rejects him. I quite like that. And the female cop breaks into Frank's place. We almost never see him there, so she has plenty of opportunity to. And she found his guns. And then Darcy invites Frank home with her. I think the episodes that don't have a sex scene, and some of the ones that do, they do tend to have, some of them do have Frank like being invited home by a girl or on a date or something. Give the guy a hand, which is, that's a bit, is the word morbid? I mean, he's dead, so yeah, morbid. It's not just, yeah. Im Namen der Ehre, which I don't know what it means. Le main invisible. Oh, the man who wasn't there, maybe, because the French must mean the invisible man, something like that. They make sense. Very stylish way to deliver exposition with the newspaper headlines on the device with the zooming and scrolling. And before the episode is over, you realize that it was so that you would recognize Adam's face. And Frank must have been the one to scroll through because he recognizes, it's like a flashback for him. So, you know, I think it maybe would have been nice if we realized that it was him. Just once you've seen the stuff on the phone, like just cut to his face and then maybe he puts away his phone or something, just to, so you know, I don't know, I guess it is intentional that we don't know that it's him. I love Frank sheepishly apologizing to Dieter for getting seaweed into the engine. And, you know, there's the guy who wants to tow her car, and she's like, I can't start it, what am I supposed to do? And, you know, the guy attacks, and, you know, Frank fights him. That's, yeah, great fight. And he helps her with the car, and gets her number. Dieter stands up for himself to Frank. What was that? Agreed, and get used to it for this episode. Things are too hot in France right now, and here I noted, I wonder if that's just for this episode or if that will be followed up on in following episodes, like if you can't work in France for a little while, or in Frank. Let me think. I didn't notice if the next couple of episodes, they might be like in Germany maybe or something, but yeah. And Carla says, have a nice day to Frank, which is, again, if you haven't watched the episode in a while or not at all, earlier the guy said something, a piece of advice. If someone says, have a nice day, doesn't mean it's going to be a nice day. And I'm not saying that Carla was in on it. It's a cute little, yeah. And he sees a box moving outside. Great. Now he's got to deal with Solid Snake. And Frank helps him put the box in his car. And I was wondering if, you know, the guy was doing that to get Frank's fingerprints because he knew that Frank would hand the money back and thus, you know, fingerprints. So that guy who asked him to move the box knew something about the contract because he calls and says, okay, he's, you know, I did my part or something. He's on his way. And, you know, it's this thing of, okay, the guy is gonna, you know, flash his lights 3 times, and that's the car you follow, and Frank sees the guy, and, you know, okay, and then he drives up, and then you see his hands taped to the steering wheel, and he drives off fast, and it's, you know, I mean, even if you thought that, okay, now we're on track, now from now on the mission is just gonna go straight forward. Nope, not that's just not the. And black cars crowd the green car that Frank is following, bump into him, making him crash, then drive off. I think that might be the most cars we've seen in the show or the movies in like one shot. I mean, it's got to be like 5 or 6. Very mysterious episode, very unusual. I quite like it. I wish more episodes were like this, honestly. Overall, I do think that the show has a little bit of a tendency to stick a little too closely to the formula, but I do think that I'm very happy with the first season. I think that they do a good job of using the fact that it's a series to go places that the movies wouldn't. It would, you know, if they had made 10 of these movies, there would not have been a single one of them that would have played out like this episode, you know. Now, and you know, the one right before this, where so much of it is like in this hockey, you know, the building with the hockey arena and all these, you know, you wouldn't have as much of the story happen there in one of the movies, but on the show, and it's not that the show only has like low budget kind of things, but it has the tight kind of feeling of which, yeah, other episodes were much bigger and more open, but on a show you can have an episode that's kind of tight and claustrophobic. I mean, I would say it's almost like a Die Hard, you know, clone, I think is the term that they tended to use. But there are no bombs to disarm. That's the big thing. Now, and the cap guy was in the trunk of the car and turns up dead. And Frank is a smartass at the cop that happened before that. And Tarconi's like, we must get him out of there as soon as possible. I guess he knows something specific about that particular station. And the guard tells Frank to have a nice day as he walks into the cell area. And Frank shares the cell with the green car driver. Those two giving you trouble? Want me to call them back? So talk. Great fight in the prison with the guy who's got a razor blade in his mouth and is like trying to, I guess, headbutt Frank or something with just, yeah, because, you know, if he had it in his hand and is trying to like slash at Frank, that might be, but you know, if he can headbutt Frank before Frank realizes he's got a razor blade, and the supposedly dead guy hands him a tennis ball, the one he was throwing back and forth between his hands earlier, and there's something inside the tennis ball. Dieter does not much like his first new client, the obnoxious kid who just wants a fast, loud car, doesn't care about the details. And the cops threaten Frank if he doesn't leave quietly, and soon he'll leave in a bag. What's with the slow-mo on the lamp? Like, going back and forth, just, yeah. And over the course of the episode, it'll cut to the construction yard a number of times. Frank insists on opening the package. Poor Dieter. And it's a cut-off hand. Frank insists on going through with the mission. And Frank drives off, and the cars drive up behind him. And one of the cops is in one of them. I quite like the Frank doing the countdown with his fingers, and it ends with him flipping him off. And the cop drives right into a car. And the gym has attractive girls working out in yoga pants. Not contrived at all. And Frank sees people outside the car. Look who's back. Back again. Great fight in the gym. They get a couple hits in. Frank doesn't beat them immediately, and he's smacked him right in the face with some of the weights. And you've got the blonde girl shouting enough, and he follows her. She accepts the package. And the guys who fought in the gym are her security because she's worried about Adam, so that makes sense. That's your uncle's hand. Yes. Putting him in prison was the only way to get the package out of prison, so that, yeah. And another great fight with the prison inmates. You know, the one guy has a rope. and the name of Adam's company, Adam Smith Invisible Hand Capital. Cute. Great fight in the construction yard, and then at the very end, a dog finds the severed hand. You've got the newspaper headline of Adam Smith being, you know, he failed, or something like that. I forget the exact details. But yeah, really like the episode. I hope there are more episodes in the second season that are so hard to, like, what's it called? Where you have such trouble guessing what's going to happen next. And it going so outside of formula. Oh, never mind. It's gonna be there. Sharks. Große Haie und kleine Fische. Requins. Big sharks and little fish, maybe. And this is the one, let's see, sharks. Yeah, I guess that makes sense for this one. I like the inner cutting showing that he hired 3 people. Love the opening fight. He uses the belt as a whip, hits the guy in the crotch with it as his pants start to fall off. The car was pristine though before that fight. Dieter and Frank, don't make trap jokes. And Juliet hitches a ride. And Frank and the other transporter know each other. I may have said it already, but I quite like the playful relationship between Frank and Carla. And Juliet puts her hand on his leg and he spills the beans. Pillow talk while driving. Car seat talk? There's been a change in plans. We're getting all the money now. I quite like this concept. This is another episode I quite like. It's fairly simple, but the idea of hiring several transporters so they have to compete over this, yeah, it's very, very cool. And the fact that it's not that there's like a bad guy who specifically wants to stop one of the transport missions, which, on a lot of the episodes, it is kind of the bad guy wants to stop the transport mission from going through, and Frank sticks to it. But here, they want the transport mission to stick through too. They just don't want Frank to be the one who carries it out. And the cops are shot, and Frank drives off. He is an anti-hero. And Tarconi broke into Frank's cabana, and Frank wipes the floor with the other transporter. And in the fight in the woods, again, a few of the sound effects sound bigger than the hit looked, but so far this has only happened in this episode in the pilot. And Juliet risks getting run over. And she calls Frank, asking him to come back or they'll kill her. And he hid in the trunk so he could surprise attack. Kick the flying can of soda to the face of that guy. Really cool. Very cool race between black car and red car. And Frank's car makes the turn, but the red one flipped over trying. And Frank strands the guy there, but he doesn't hurt him. I really like the bearded transporter. He's been considering quitting forever. He's like, how many runs do you think you've done? And Frank's like, I've lost count. And the other guy's like, 1,000. Excuse me. My throat is so dry. And he's like, I've been saying to myself, this is the last one for the last 500. And, he worked during the Cold War and helped our side. I demand a spin-off series focused on him. And Dieter's date had a boyfriend. He found her and wants to fight Dieter. Pretty cliche. And really, weren't internet dating jokes kind of dated by 2012? I'm not sure when Tinder became a thing. I think once that happened, didn't people kind of stop making those jokes? I don't know. very cool guns used by the ambush guys, and he rams them, and the bearded transporter was hit. You tell Viv what happened. Address is on the back. You know that she would have been screwed if whoever killed him wanted to take her out too and got to his car before a friendly did. And he keeps some of the money for bearded transporter's family. Honestly, I thought he'd light the money on fire in front of the guy to teach him to never again encourage violence during one of these missions. City of Love. Die letzten Stunden von Paris. Un bombe dans Paris. Oh yeah, a bomb in Paris. Sorry, reverted to, well, thanks briefly there. The lights of Paris or something in German, I guess. And Frank talks on the phone to the delivery people like he's talking about transporting. Aren't you going to invite me in? Why? Are you a vampire? And Middle Eastern terrorists want to sneak a bomb into a city using Frank, and you know, I don't approve of the negative stereotype, but I do like that over the course of the episode we see that there's more to them. That yeah, it's not black and white. The cops found the bomb and shoot at Frank and start chasing him. Again, I quite like when he has to deal with cops as in, you know, it's whenever he's dealing with like goons working for a criminal, it's like, okay, so obviously, you know, he's gonna defeat them and it's gonna be, you know, but when it's like cops and such, it's a little, you know, he can't just kill them. Not that he necessarily kills every person he comes across that he. 1 second, I just gotta check to see, did I? Yes, I did. And Carla tells Frank there's a terrorist threat, and you know, he realizes they think he's got something to do with it. Actually, 1 second. And, you know, stereotypical gang. That guy is freaking huge. I got to, you know, it was like, am I watching the 2009 Sherlock Holmes? No. A really great fight. I love the huge guy doesn't move, even when hit by a crowbar. For a chunk of the discussion between Carla and the agent, we see one person's face while the other is talking. Did they have to rewrite in ADR a bunch of dialogue? Some of it was background for the story, so maybe it was changed. Maybe they decided that it was too black and white and something. I will say it didn't sound like ADR. You know, it's kind of, it takes you out of it a little bit when you hear dialogue in, you know, movie or show or the like, and it's very clearly ADR'd. And I didn't, yeah, that wasn't the case here. It also wasn't the point. And Frank badgers the guys so he'll fight and he can get loose. But the woman got to him before he could drive off. That was also a badass escape. Like, he's hanging with, like, thing on the, you know, he has to jump up and just, yeah, that was really, really cool. I mean, there's let's see, yes, it's in the trailer. In one of the most recent of the Mission Impossible movies, you know, Tom Cruise has to do something similar. It looked cooler and I think was more extensive. There was more he had to get past in this than in that. Now, I like Frank dodging her knife attacks. And they all get into the car. Frank drives them. Frank gets out fine, but the cop cars crash. And the cops shot a guy who was running away and wasn't dangerous. Very relevant to this day. And we mostly hear about it happening in America, but it does happen in other countries as well. Now, And, you know, the terrorist sister says to him, "Where were you when I needed you?" And, you know, yeah, points out, you know, you were planning, and, you know, just spreading more hatred. Let's see. I really appreciate the potential terrorists discussing whether they should get revenge or if it'll only bring more pain onto their people. I realize that it's basically one of them says we have to do this, the other says it'll only bring more pain onto our people. But, you know, I appreciate that they're not just all bloodthirsty monsters or something. And you do understand why the one who does insist right up until the end, he does insist to use the bomb. You understand why, you know, and it's not when his family tries to talk him out of it, you do get the sense that it's just he can't let it go. He can't. I'm sorry, that came out wrong. He demands revenge. You know, it's not that he doesn't care that they're trying to talk him out of it. It's that basically he's so, yeah, you know, like she said, he's so dedicated to this hatred. But yeah, the episode could very easily have been completely one-sided with them all just being bad guys. You know, the sister and her friends help Frank find and stop the bomb. As the sister is dying, I appreciate the not quite heartbeat sound effects that functions as her heartbeat slowing and stopping as she dies. And they're fighting in the front of the car as it is driving. Very cool. And he hangs onto the car door. And Frank has 5.5 minutes to get the bomb to where it won't hurt people. Where's Frank Bauer when you need him? Jack Bauer, not Frank Bauer. Anyway, back to Jack Martin. He made a ramp jump with the car, got it into the disposal vehicle right before it blew up. Now that's a climax. Big trouble, very big trouble. And we see Juliet has put maybe 100 photos of Frank up on a wall. And at this point I was thinking, maybe, is she a stalker? We don't know for sure if her interest in him is related to her being a cop. That could be a misdirect, but, you know, turns out that is ultimately, but, which makes I don't know, maybe I'm reading into it. Maybe she was never, maybe we're not supposed to think she's a stalker, but it looked more like a stalker wall than a police investigation wall to me. But yeah, you know, I did not see coming what was going to happen in the finale with them. Another unusual episode. Almost feels like a 24 crossover. I like when these episodes go so against the grain. Now, because again, you know, it's not Frank going around to different places and having to stop the bomb. No, he drives this bomb, then he drives it to the gang, and then they capture him, and he tries to escape, but they capture him again. And then he has to work with the gang to get to the bomb, and it was very, very different from a lot of the others. Let's see. Switch. Why does that? That is... Wait, did I accidentally... I'm gonna have to deal with that in a few minutes. Now... Oh, right, the alternate title, sorry. 1 second. Echt falsch en contrefaçon, I don't know. Counterfeit, that makes sense. And what's it called? The fake, I guess, the fake painting. I think I prefer the title Switch because you don't know what it refers to. And you shouldn't really go into this episode knowing that there's going to be a counterfeit painting. And there's a dog in Frank's car. He opened the package. I quite like it. its behavior there. And Frank is chased by a guy on a motorcycle. And the motorcycle drove over the red car instead of being slowed down as Frank had expected. And then it drives up stairs and then back down other stairs, catching up with him. And Frank pushed crates in front of the motorcycle and crashes. Driver flies over and we see it's a woman. So you're the good guy? Good, bad. I'm the guy with the gun. And the dominatrix, the one's going to cut fingers off of Frank's dominant hand. And bad guy grabs the fire poker. I could beat you to death with this poker, but that would make a mess on the carpet. So he throws him off a building, which kind of reminds me of Durant in the second Darkman movie. And, we see that Frank can drive into the truck while the truck is moving and back out. I do have to admit, maybe it'll happen in the second season. I do think it would have been cool to have, part of an action scene as, maybe Frank just drives into he thinks he's lost the bad guys. He drives into the back of the truck. And then, the bad guys catch up to him, shoot at the truck. And then Dieter opens the truck out, and then he backs back out. And, we have a car chase or something. Very stereotypical depiction of BDSM and, one or more of the parties not having control over what happens. Yes, I realize that Clara is not supposed to be seen as just a typical BDSM lover. She's the villain's right hand, not a good guy. But they could easily have had a distinction. The husband who was cheating, which is also a really obnoxious stereotype about BDSM. He could have said, the healthy BDSM relationship would include having, he would have a say, and, she could be like, yeah, but it also includes not cheating on your spouse or something like that, Well, let's see. When this came out, I think 50 Shades of Grey was a thing when this episode aired. So, yeah. She really does wear that black leather corset all the time, doesn't she? And she did cut off one of that guy's fingers, and then he spilled the beans. Excuse me. Now, so the motorcyclist has had that painting in her family for generations, and it was painted by one of her ancestors. Now we get why she's so passionate about it. And the motorcyclist brings a gun. And we see, they cut off all the fingers of this guy, so he must have been telling the truth right up to his death. And the motorcyclist shoots one guy. Some of the people at the art gallery are a little weird. At least that one guy who says he had an erection at age 9 because of a painting. And then, you have that one girl who pours paint over herself, starts moving across the canvas on the floor. I'd like to say that that's the weirdest thing I've seen in connection with art, or even painting. And the fight involving paint being poured over the goons has some vibe from the oil fight from the first movie. And Claire's going to cut the fingers off the gray suit guy. And she kissed him to lift the gun off him, but he removed the clip first. Now, and they pretend the motorcyclist had been attacked so they could get into the house. Get help! And they cut off one finger of the gray suit guy, and then he told the truth. That might have been what I was thinking of before. Good fight between Clara and Frank. Never mind, that might have been mistyped. I quite like the... Oh, right. Clara, not Carla. Sorry. Yeah. Now I quite like the gradual escalation of the fire. First it starts by them knocking over one of those, industrial, land, for construction and such. It gets knocked over, sparks come out of it, starts a small fire. Then the contents of that one can spill out and makes it a lot worse. I don't know what exactly it is, but I do know that some of the things used in art kind of stuff are very flammable. So yeah, it's not like, wait, why was there a can of gasoline? No, it's varnish. Maybe, is that what it's called? Something. I think maybe there's a lot of alcohol in it or something. And let's see, which means I know at least one person who might try to drink it, because if there's alcohol in it, we had chemistry, and what we made was technically, it had alcohol in it, and he took a sip, which, yeah, I guess that's what happened. Okay. Yeah, anyway, my painting, it's gone, Macready. Clara smiles and walks away, leaving him to die in the fire. You know, I think it would be kind of cool if some of the surviving, like, villains and right hand of villain in this first season, if maybe they did like a Sinister Six kind of thing in the second season, where they gang up on Frank and attack him together to get revenge, instead of him being involved, making it personal, which it isn't always in these. Right. And Frank switched the painting, so she does have the real painting. That's why he was so eager to get her out of there when he knew how much it meant to her. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that he knew, they'd already won. I expected Clara to get in the car when seemingly hitchhiking before she showed the finger cutter, and then Juliet catches her. Every one of those assholes had it coming. And she gives the painting to her grandfather, and he's quite happy. Now, let's just make sure that... Let's see. Yeah, I'll have to do. There we go. 12 hours. Wir Lauf gegen die Zeit. So yeah, 12 hours to survive. That makes quite good sense. Now, the opening ad kind of reminds me of that fake Umbrella Corporation ad that was used in some trailers for, I forget if it's the first or the second of the Resident Evil movies. And Dieter was in the car the whole time. And Dieter was the one making the whining noise. Oh, good. My colleague was just asking a technical question. We can't see the other dude's face right there. We know that there's actually another guy there, but it kind of looks like he's pretending there's someone there. I like the tense music as the guy realizes who the Asian guy is. And, Frank keeps asking Carla, and she keeps saying, information withheld. I was half expecting Carla to say information withheld when he says, do we know anything about this job too? Sorry, comma between job and too then. Microchip in his neck with toxin in it that means that he can't remove it. 12-hour countdown to the toxin releasing anyway. I love this. More episodes need to be like this. Comic book like, video game like. Yeah. The first episode could also have been like a mission in a Just Cause game or something. Maybe a Grand Theft Auto game also, but yeah. Well, maybe more one of the Grand Theft Auto clones. Dieter is personally offended by the guest on the podcast. I don't understand anything of the... I think they're talking about like racing and car stuff. Yeah. Great fight with handcuffs against the two cops. And Dieter calls into the show and argues with the guy. And they want to test the toxin on Frank. One of the rare times Frank shoots someone. And the guy crushed the antidote. Frank, you cannot leave a German car in Switzerland. This is common sense. And Dieter uses a screwdriver as a fork to eat lunch. Dieter has that song, I don't know what it's called. The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music as his ringtone. Mr. Bernhardt. I didn't know Zero or the Matrix sequels. Agent Johnson was in this. Fighting right next to a cliff, so cool. And again, there has to be some kind of like green screen thing or something going on. It was completely convincing. And Frank gets the antidote. I forgot to note this in the place where it actually goes, so I'll put it here. The girl flashing Frank from the car was very gratuitous. And Tarconi calls Frank, and he tells him who to apprehend. And Frank saves Dieter, who called earlier about being in trouble. Frank may pretend not to care, but he clearly does. Frank gave that dude a lot of money, the guy from the call-in show, just to leave him alone. Not just, but... Now... that brings us to the season finale, Cherchez la Femme, which is also what it's called in German, I guess, and double jeu in the French. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, in the German, because on my discs it's always German, and it actually said Cherchez la Femme, which I'm pretty sure means get the girl, or retrieve the girl. He had to run. No, literally, he had to run. And, he picks up the girl and walks away carrying her. That's a lot like with Lie in the first movie, when she tries to get away from him. So, Juliet is working for that guy. She gives him the information she's gotten on him. This is the first time we meet that guy, so it's quite nice. This is the confirmation of, okay, she's working for that guy. She's not stalking Frank from some kind of other personal reason. And Jet starts to listen to music, knowing she can't convince Frank. Who in 2012 were using the big earmuff kind of thing to listen to music in public? Earbuds, sure, but those big things went out of fashion years before. I mean, did they accidentally think they were... I mean, like, in Guardians of the Galaxy, it makes sense because he has them from the 80s, but yeah. She's hacking into the mainframe through the router. I'm in. And Frank realizes something bad is going on. And he made an illegal U-turn. He smacked the car right into that dude. Again, that looked very real. That can't possibly have been completely real. Great fight against the guy in the same room as the girl. And Frank shoots a couple of guys. Frank really hasn't told Carla about Juliet. He's taking a really big chance on Juliet. And she hacked into his computer for the GPS. What an ungrateful ingrate she turned out to be. And then, like, he's... Yeah, she says, oh, I could have taken care of them myself. I beg to differ, because you were hiding behind, not even doing a good job of hiding, behind curtains when they came in. If Frank hadn't gotten there, she would have been dead. But that's supposed to be her character. She's, like, arrogant and such, because she's a young punk hacker. Give me one reason not to blow your head off. Someone wants to talk to you. It seems like you answered your own question. I mean, there's got to be 100 reasons why you don't blow him away, but right now you clearly can't think of one. And the bad guy says Jet is a terrorist. The minute we get the girl, kill all of them. And you've got snipers ready to kill them, and the cops arrive just in time. Very clever. That's what Frank said. I'll do. He said to Jet, I'll do something that you would never do. Call the cops. They're not going to shoot people in public in front of the cops who aren't a clear threat to them. And she turns the green lights on so he can drive them. And she stops them with those little things that come up out of the ground. They barely stop in time. And the bad guy threatens Tarconi with demotion. That's really that might be the first time in the show that he's been threatened and he, took it seriously. And Carla knows it was Juliet in the warehouse because of the perfume. And they blow up Frank's house with an RPG and reasonable CGI. And just fuck him up, Frank. I intend to. And he's dual wielding, submachine guns, pistols, more submachine guns. Absolutely awesome. and martial arts against the Spec Ops leader. Again, a few of the punches have excessive sound effects, and then he knocks him into the water. I love that fucking house. Very different reaction from the first movie where he's just like, I'll rebuild. And Juliet's boss is dirty. And Frank hid in Juliet's trunk and thus got into their base. And the bad guy points a gun at Juliet and shoots Frank, but he was wearing a vest, of course. You know, no one ever thinks to shoot in the head. You know, they can't possibly be wearing a vest. And Frank lets the bad guy fall to his death, which clearly shocks some of the onlookers. And the season ends, and it's like Frank's on vacation. You know, he's relaxing with Juliet. He doesn't answer Carla's phone call. Now, I don't know if I'm going to go over every last one of them here, but this is where I'm gonna go into recurring elements. See, originally I was just going to go into these once I got to like the review itself, but I'm not going to give away all of them in the review itself, so I'm going to go into at least some of them here. Let's see. Which does mean that there will be some restating between this and the review. Now, let's see. Yeah, I'm just briefly gonna, this is from Wikipedia. The show was co-produced by the French Atlantique Productions and the Canadian Boutique Entertainment Company, QVF, and broadcast by M6 RTL Television, the Movie Network, and Movie Central. Originally, HBO and Cinemax were involved, but they dropped out in 2013. Oh, I guess, does that mean that this first season was on HBO and then the second one isn't? You know, I was wondering if you could tell about Skinemax and HBO if there would be lots of cheesecake. And yes, you've got gratuitous nudity in episodes 1 through 3, episode 5, episodes 9 through 11. And let's see, there's sex scenes in episodes 1 through 3, episode 6, episodes 8 and 9. And yeah, just to briefly, episode 1, it's Frank. In episode 2, it's Jimmy, Frank's old partner. Episode 3, it's Frank. Episode 6, it's one-off episode villain. And episode 8, it's Carla. And episode 9, it's Frank. And those are them. So yeah, that's only 3 times out of 12 episodes. That's only a fourth of the time that it's Frank having sex in the episode. And let's briefly see, it's 3, 4, 5, 6, and that means only half of the time it's Frank is the one having sex when there's. Now let's see. And in episode 1, I forget if it's in episode 2, episode 3, episode 8, there's a bath or shower scene, although not necessarily showing nudity. And let's see. Right, and yeah, this has kind of soft continuity a la the original Star Trek and Star Trek Next Generation. One episode will typically have one new client, one new transporter mission. There's not a single two-parter in the first season. The only real thing that changed, the running thing is Juliet, who appears in the season opener, and it comes to a climax in the season finale. But yeah, I eventually stopped noting, but I don't think a single client, or major supporting character has shown up after the first episode they appear in, other than Juliet, And I mean, Tarconi isn't a regular. Frank's a regular, Dieter's a regular, and Carla is a regular. I'm not sure Tarconi's enough episodes to be called a regular, but yeah. Actually, I guess Juliet is almost a regular since she's in most episodes, I think. And to an extent, you can watch, you can just watch a single episode. You don't have to watch the ones before or after it. The only real thing is Juliet. Now, which also does kind of mean that you can watch them out of order, as people did outside of Canada and the UK. Now, let's see. Right, this season is great overall. It has a great season opener and a great finale. Season finale. And yeah, so far there hasn't been a single episode that I don't think is at least pretty good. I wouldn't say all of them are amazing, but I mean, there isn't one that I've forgotten. Reading over the notes, I wasn't like, wait, when did this happen? And there isn't one where I felt like a major element was just bad throughout. Like there were the things that have really bothered me tend to be fairly minor overall. Now, let's see. Right, and yeah, all three movies have at least one several minutes long, car chase or driving scene with precision driving, usually with Frank in his own car, and it's often early, sometimes in the first scene of the movie. In the episodes, it's not always long. Sometimes it's maybe half a minute, and not necessarily, there's one where it's just, Frank driving around this, what's it called, the car parking area. Or does that one have more? Anyway, in the first movie, it's driving the bank robbers out of the city. In the second, it's driving Lola away from the cops. In the third one, it's not Frank, it's Malcolm driving Valentina away from the people who want to do securities. They're entering the country. And yeah, all 12 episodes have at least one precision driving scene. It's just not always the first scene. And I do really, the first time that it wasn't the first scene, I was a little surprised. But I'm glad that overall they had different. It would get boring if every single episode opened with precision driving, and if it was always a mission, and yeah. Now, and yeah, really, then you have the buggy chase through the woods in episode 2, but other than that, Frank tends to be driving a fairly regular car, mostly his own, which, I mean, I just think that there's room to do a couple of more variations on it. And all 4 films have a jump between 2 flat surfaces. In the first one, it's off a bridge over a city street onto one of those cars that has a bunch of other cars on top of it. In the second, it's off the top of a car garage onto another car garage. In the third, it's off a bridge onto a train car, then off that train car into another train car, and refueled. It's in the trailer, so it's not a spoiler. Off something, I forget, onto that ramp thing where you walk in the airport to get onto the plane. Now, episode 4 has jumping via ramp off street over 2 L train cars back onto the street after it. I think that might be the only one in season 1. Now, let's see. I think I said this. Yeah, just to briefly. In the movies, but not so far in the show, there's one especially big and strong goon met fairly early on that Frank will fight and defeat, not necessarily in the first fight. maybe 2/3 in or later. Sometimes that is the first time he's fighting that guy, but yeah, happens in all three movies. In the first three movies, I forget if it's in Refueled. Hasn't happened in a single episode so far. I thought it was going to with that really big guy in the gang terrorist episode, but Frank fought him once briefly, but then they don't fight again. Now, let's see. And in the movies, goons and or Frank will fight with like axes, swords, and such in at least one fight, or knockout sometimes without a fight. Now, in the episodes, this is where we get really specific. In the first episode, Frank and goons fight with pipes. In the second episode, Frank uses tree branch, at least one, maybe more than one. In episode 3, mannequins and a steel pipe off a rack. But both of them in a clothing store, and both of them Frank. And episode 4 is defibrillator, 5 shower curtain, and shovels, Frank and goons. I'm not going to say every time it's Frank. And also Daredevil's walking stick. And in that it's also the episode guest Jack, and a belt, both, kitchen knife, goon, mop, both. Episode 6, there's a suitcase of money, handcuffs, including while they're attached to him, a fire extinguisher, dentist equipment, hockey stick on ice, Frank and the villain, and the long African knife by the African guy. And episode 7, that thing you use to take a wheel off a car, a pair of gym weights, a razor blade in his mouth that he tries to headbutt Frank with, and of course a goon, rope, both, and a 2x4. And episode 8, it's a guy's own belt, and it's Frank's car's seatbelt, steering wheel, and airbag, and a can of soda kicked into the face. A machete by a goon. Episode 9, net, crowbar, goons use a bat, a switchblade, and a taser, a knife. Episode 10, empty cans of paint by Frank. Episode 11, handcuffs, including while they're attached to others. And what looked like food trays, I realized that's not what they are, but that's what they look like. And in episode 11, a bat by both Frank and a goon. All 12 episodes have martial arts, at least one martial arts fight in them. And Frank disarms one or more goons, even though he himself doesn't have a gun. And he does this in every episode except the 9th one. And he does not use guns himself very often, like in the movies. Now, there are guns fired from a car in the first 2 episodes, episodes 4 and 5, episodes 8. And cool climax location situation in series. Movies 1 through 3 do, in the first one's on, under, and inside the cab of a speeding truck full of human traffic victims. Second, it's on board a plane that lost its pilot and so is going up, left, down randomly, and also him getting to the plane. The third one's a speeding train, both, inside of. And I'm not going to say what it is for Refueled, since this aired before that came out. And episode 1, driving a truck fast onto a bridge that hasn't been completed yet. Episode 3, Frank drives up to and jumps onto a plane that's trying to take off. And let's see, episode 9, Frank driving a car with a bomb in it with minutes left into a bomb disposal vehicle right before it blows up. Episode 10, the basement of a house burning with several people trapped inside. Episode 11, a martial arts fight between Frank and the guy who has the antidote for the toxin in him a few steps away from a cliff face. And ultimately the guy falls off and dies. Is dropped off, but he goes off the cliff. And episode 12, Frank's house is blown up with him, Carla, and Jet inside. Then special ops attack with guns, and he shoots them with dual-wielding submachine guns and pistols. That's we know from an earlier episode that Frank has guns in his house, so now he uses them. I really appreciate that. They didn't make a big deal out of him having guns. It was a big deal that Juliet found out that he has guns, but it's not a surprise if you've watched the movies that he keeps guns. In the first movie, he has them on this boat. I'm not sure we see him have guns in the house, but he doesn't continue fighting after the house blows up, and then he just flees, which is also something I really appreciate. I mean, I love the way they do it in the movie, but I really appreciate that here they had him go and fight the guys instead of going away. Now, let's see. I guess, that's most of it. Let's see. I guess that is all of it. Just to make sure. Yes. And all of the ones I've gone over and such are ones I try to list for all episodes. So the ones where I only mention specific episodes, as best as I can tell, it's only in those episodes. But sometimes I do have to look on the laptop when I'm voice typing. And so, I try not to pause episodes. I've had bad experiences where pausing, even fairly rarely, decreased the life of a DVD greatly. So I don't want to risk it, especially considering, it's not just like one movie I'd be losing, it's 4 episodes, and sometimes also a behind the scenes kind of thing. So yeah. And I guess that is everything. So again, I really liked this season. I loved most of it. I guess a question is, are there filler episodes? I don't think that none of the episodes felt like that episode was just made because they had to have a certain amount of episodes to the season. They all felt like there was real passion behind them, and they all had at least some creativity. Not all of them equally much, and no 2 episodes felt like they were essentially the same. Like, sometimes basically someone will write an episode and then along the way they'll realize, ooh, I really want to do this with the episode. Oh, but I also like to do this with the episode. And they just make 2 episodes so they can do both things. I think Star Trek Voyager did that at least once, and it's just, I'm glad that we got to see both things, but it's a little, I don't know, it was a little obvious to me that they wrote one episode and then they realized they had 2 different things that they wanted to explore with the episode, and they didn't really rewrite very much of it when they did the episode a second time. And that's just unfortunate. And that's, that happens with some shows. I don't think it really happened here. And I mean, you could say, oh, it's only 12 episodes. It's happened sometimes on, seasons with very few episodes. So, yeah. Now, yes, I am really excited for the second season, although I have read in reviews that it's apparently not as good. I forget what happened between. I guess the reason that they didn't do an episode that they didn't do season 2013 was maybe that they had to find a new channel to air it in America, maybe, since they dropped out there, or I don't know. But yeah, apparently season 2 is very different from season 1, and it's worse in most ways. And yeah, I'm gonna try to review it as fairly as I can. And I'm gonna watch the next episode tomorrow. So I think it is 2 weeks from now. So next week is not a video on Transport the series. Now, that covers the season, so I hope you've enjoyed watching as I've enjoyed recording, and I will catch you next time.